stop slipping and stop cutting your socks. We have 15 different color options between 3 grip socks and 2 sleeve types. Something for everybody at a price that just makes sense. Available now at puregripsocks.com.
Once upon a time, the takedown model F30 was the boot of choice of many professionals and arguably the better product over the top-end, more expensive F50. Could that possibly be the case once again in 2025? Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to what has been a pretty elusive product, at least in the US market, the Adidas F50 Messi Pro, the first takedown model in the Messi-specific F50 lineup, which, like a lot of the Adidas Pro tier takedown models, looks almost identical to that of the top-end Elite. However, unlike the Elites that retail for $270, the Pro option retails for $160. That's $110 less for a football boot with the exact same upper as the Elites. Whereas we've seen with so many different takedown models over the years, looks can be deceiving, where even if you do put the same upper as the top-end model, sometimes the fit and feel is so off that none of it really matters. Not the case here with the F50 Messi Pro. Where, don't get me wrong, there definitely are some differences, and we're gonna go over what those are compared to the top-end Elites in today's video, but I think the big question that needs to be answered here is, for the vast majority of people, is the extra $110 for the Elites justified at all? In other words, for 40% more, are you really getting 40% more performance? I'd argue no. So if you're interested in learning why that is, stick around, watch the entire review. We're gonna cover all the details, including how they fit and feel on feet. And if you are interested in a pair of F50 Messi Pros for yourself, you can pick them up below their normal retail price by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes by checking out the first link down below. And as always, if you guys appreciate the unsponsored, brutally honest reviews on this channel, even of the takedown models, don't forget to drop a like on the video and make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already, so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2025. Where first things first, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, both of these boots feature the exact same upper. They're so similar, in fact, that when I hold these two boots side by side from this angle, it's pretty well impossible to tell which is which. Seriously, take a guess. If you guessed that was the Pro, you're wrong. It's this one. So with that in mind, we will talk about the upper, but we're gonna save it for a little bit later. Instead, we're gonna start with what is the main difference between the Pros and the Elites, and that is the sole plate, which is not a sprint frame, but instead a sprint shell, specifically the Sprint Shell 360, which of course features a solid sole plate that very closely mirrors the design of the top-end Sprint Frame 360, but you will notice does not feature a true external heel counter connected to the sole plate, where instead the heel structure is internal, and then they put this piece of basically thicker vinyl plastic type material to mimic the appearance of a heel counter. Where up close the visual difference is pretty significant, but from a distance you really wouldn't be able to tell. Where if we look at the bottom of these two boots, Elites on the lower part of your screen, Pros on the top part of the screen, again, there is hardly a visual difference. The sole plate material itself does appear to be slightly different, and because of the sole plate being different, the construction also changes a little bit. From a stiffness standpoint, I would say that this is slightly firmer in feel and maybe a little bit less responsive in terms of that spring back effect you get in the forefoot, but I wouldn't necessarily say that it is a huge difference from the top end model. It maybe just doesn't feel quite as low profile or as premium as the Elites, but after a couple minutes of wear, honestly, I don't think most people would even notice the difference. And then as far as the FG stud pattern is concerned, it's identical to what you'll find on the Elites and pretty much the same as what you get across the board with the F50 lineup, where it's obviously a pair of speed boots where you want aggressive traction, but it definitely incorporates some rounded, less aggressive shaped studs, particularly in the forefoot, that kind of prioritize a little bit more of a well-rounded movement style rather than just being as aggressive as possible. So there's plenty of bite, don't get me wrong, but if you're after the most aggressive traction out there, F50s probably aren't the way to go. This is more so what I would describe as a great performing, very well-rounded stud pattern that's just super easy to get along with. And as far as the heel is concerned, yes, the external heel counter on the Elite is a little bit more solid, but that is not to say that there isn't enough structure on the Pros, and certainly from a fit and feel perspective at the back of the heel, again, it's almost impossible to tell a difference. Unless you have the Pros on one foot and the Elites on the other, but even then the difference is subtle. And then there's the weight, where historically, particularly with their speed boots, Adidas takedown models have a very lightweight top end option and then a very hopeful takedown model that looks super similar, but for whatever reason just weighs significantly more. Is that the case with this Messi F50 though? Both in the same size 9.5 US. We'll start off with the standard top end Elite model. Again, $270 for these. They weigh in at 7 ounces exactly, the equivalent of 198 grams. Obviously very light, as you'd expect from a top end speed boot. And then we'll throw on the Pros, which you can see weigh in at 7.65 ounces, the equivalent of 217 grams, which is an almost 20 gram weight difference in favor of the Elites. They're definitely the lighter feeling pair of football boots, and I don't want to discredit 20 grams as being insignificant, because again, part of what you pay for with a top end model is the best of the best in every possible area, particularly when you're talking about a pair of speed boots, especially an F50. The expectation should be that they're as light as possible. So certainly if you want the lightest possible experience from an F50, spending that extra $110 on the Elites is the way to go. Having said that, compared to so many takedown models in the speed category that we've seen from Adidas in the past, in and around the 7.5 ounce mark is actually pretty decent considering the price tag. Not to mention the upper is exactly the same. So if you can live with those couple extra grams, the experience is more or less identical, or at least a lot closer than we've seen between the Elites and the Pros in the past. Which brings us back to the upper, a 1-to-1 exact copy of the Elites as far as I can tell, which is kind of unusual for Adidas because typically we do see a lot of similarities between the Elites and the Pro, at least when you're talking about the upper. That's the case with the Predator 25. However, when you compare the upper of the Pred 25 Pro to that of the Elite, it's very noticeable that there's a pretty significant quality drop off in terms of how everything was put together. Not the case with the F50 Messi Pro. This, like I said, from a top-down view, looks exactly like the top-end Elites. And the feel is pretty much identical as well. For the Messi variation of the F50, instead of that more raw barefoot synthetic material, you get a Hybrid Touch 2.0, which is also the same material you will find on the Predator 25 we just talked about, but for whatever reason on this boot, it's just a little bit softer and more flexible. So compared to other normal variations of the F50, the non-Messi versions, this has a little bit of a softer, I don't want to necessarily say more leather-like, but it certainly trends in that direction and kind of appeals to the crowd that really enjoyed the Hybrid Touch 2014 F50 Adizero. This is probably the closest thing to that boot that we've had since 2014. Not to be outdone by other boots, you'll also notice a micro texturing in kind of like a zigzag pattern, gray on this particular colorway on either side of the forefoot, making its way into the midfoot as well. This is their Sprint Web micro texture that adds a little bit of a gritty finish to the surface of the upper, genuinely providing extra grip on the ball in a way that doesn't necessarily feel sticky, but is definitely noticeable in terms of not leaving the upper completely slick. Across the top of the foot, nothing changes either. It's still a nice deep central lacing system, and of course, that customized Messi tongue that he's had exclusively on his football boots for such a long time, that is now finally available at retail, not only on the top end model, but even on the first takedown, where effectively this boot has a more traditional U-throat design with a giant cutout across the top of the foot running through the middle, but instead of the more one-piece style tongue that you get on the normal F50s with these kind of stirrup anchors along the side of the foot, this features a prime knit tongue tongue, which is an elasticated knit material reinforced by some fuse on the top layer that's connected on the lateral side and then just wraps across the top of the foot and is detached on the medial side. So basically the opening is gigantic. They're super easy to put on and take off because of this element. And then this super unstructured tongue just kind of wraps across the top of the foot, tucks in on the medial side, and just gives you a little bit less tension and more freedom in terms of how the boot wraps your foot through the midfoot and forefoot area compared to the normal F50. It's not necessarily a matter of better or worse in terms of overall performance, but certainly from a comfort perspective, I much prefer the way it is on the Messi boots than it is on the normal F50. Moving to the rear, again, almost nothing changes from the Elites. It's still a low-cut construction. You still have that extended back. You have a microfiber lining material for the heel area with pretty much the exact same amount of padding that I think feels great. And unlike so many Adidas takedown models that have been plagued by a super shallow fit, particularly in the heel, that is not the case here with the F50 Pro. It fits and feels in this area of the foot pretty well identical to that of the top end Elite. And then the insole, something else that Adidas has not done particularly well in the past, is directly taken from that top end model. It features this soft microfiber lining material on the surface, some minor perforations through the heel, but otherwise it's made from a single layer of this white foam, which again is pretty standard as far as high-end football boots go, but the fact we're getting it on the first takedown model, again, is not something that we're necessarily used to with the 3 stripes. On feet, as you can see, there is hardly any visual difference at all between the takedown model Pro and the top end Elite, and the same can be said about how they fit and feel. Of course, with one on each foot, there are some subtle differences that you will notice. The heel is slightly bulkier and slightly more shallow in fit on the Pro than it is on the Elite. But again, unless you had the Elite on the other foot, I really don't think there's any aspect of the fit and feel of the F50 Pro that would really bother anybody, or at least would come out as feeling like a huge negative, as we've seen with so many Adidas takedown models in the past. From a width and shaping perspective, the volume is pretty well identical between the two, and if anything, there might actually be a smidge extra in the width of the F50 Pro compared to the top end Elites, which is typically the opposite of what we find with Adidas takedown models. From an overall fit perspective though, both of these boots obviously fit super well. If you're looking for that snug speed boot feel, but also something that has a little bit more of a relaxed vibe about it in terms of not necessarily squeezing your feet super tight, and also the Hybrid Touch 2.0 upper, just generally having a little bit more softness and slightly more padding to it than some of these raw, thin synthetic boots like the normal F50, I definitely think they offer a level of comfort that you won't necessarily find from a lot of other synthetic speed boots on the market. Like I said, from a width perspective, they do have a little bit of extra width through the midfoot compared to the Elites, making them a really suitable option for the vast majority of foot types. Obviously, if you had super wide feet and generally just don't like that tight speed boot fit and feel, they might not be the best option for you, but if you're into the whole speed thing, I don't necessarily think that you're going to have an issue with the width of this boot whatsoever. And then as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing these in my usual size 9.5 US, and the fit and the length is perfect. So if you are looking to get a pair for yourself, I would strongly recommend going true to size in order to achieve the best possible fit. So in conclusion, I obviously don't have to explain to you why I think the F50 Messi Pro is such a great value for money option at that mid-level price point. $160 is not cheap for any pair of football boots, but considering other options, these are certainly one of the best. The bigger question that I think you need to be asking yourself is if the Messi F50 Pro is as good as it is for $160 and so similar to that top-end Elite model, is it justified for anybody to spend the extra $110 on the Elites? In my opinion, there's really only 3 reasons why you should spend the extra money. Reason number 1 is you just want something that feels as light as possible. The Elite is undeniably lighter than the Pros, even if it's not by a lot. The second reason is a lot more minute. I do think that this sole plate feels a little bit better than that of the Pro, but again, once you get used to playing in the Pros, I don't think that's a difference that's going to affect your overall experience. And then reason number 3 is that as an overall package, I do still believe that the Elite version is the best of what the F50 line has on offer. However, for that extra 40% added to the overall cost, I certainly don't think that they are 40% better when it comes to performance. If you just want a great pair of Messi variant F50s for $160 rather than $270, I think the vast majority of people would be very satisfied with the F50 Pro and would probably be better off saving that $110. It's the best Adidas speed boot takedown model in a very long time.